For 10,000 years, the rhythm of human life was dictated by the sun and the seasons. Tools were extensions of the human arm.
And power was limited to the strength of a horse, the flow of a river, or the direction of the wind. A merchant in 1700 lived in a world fundamentally similar to that of a merchant in ancient Rome. Everything was hand-produced, local and finite. But in the late 18th century, in the damp, mineral-rich landscape of Great Britain, that ancient rhythm began to break. Humans learned how to extract power from the earth itself
and scale it beyond anything seen before. We call it the Industrial Revolution.
Beginning around 1760, spreading to continental Europe and the United States.
This event marked the transition from hand production to machines. It was the moment humanity unlocked the stored energy of millions of years.
And used it to drive the gears of a new civilization.
In the mid-18th century, Great Britain was the leading commercial nation on Earth.
It controlled a global empire stretching from the Caribbean to the Indian subcontinent. It was a nation of merchants, entrepreneurs, and thinkers. But more importantly, it was a nation sitting on a literal mountain of coal. This single resource would spark a fire that would consume the old world and forge a new one.
To understand how this revolution began, we must look at the 5 pillars of industrial supremacy. First was high agricultural productivity. The British agricultural revolution had already begun.
Using mechanical seed drills and iron plows to produce more food with fewer workers.
This freed up a massive labor force that was now looking for work.
Second was political stability and the rule of law. Britain had a legal system that protected property rights.
Stacklet and its focus fading in. And encouraged the formation of joint stock companies.
The third pillar was a geographic windfall. Britain was an island with extensive coastlines and navigable rivers.
Making transport easy.
Fourth was the scientific revolution, which had created a culture of experimentation and discovery. A culture of experimentation and discovery.
And finally, there was the unique combination of high wages and cheap energy.
In Britain, it was expensive to hire a man, but incredibly cheap to buy coal.
This created a massive incentive to build machines that could do the work of humans.
Before the factories, there was the putting out system. Families worked in their own homes.
Women would spin raw wool or cotton into yarn, and men would weave that yarn into cloth.
But the demand for textiles was exploding. Britain had developed a taste for white gold, the cotton.
Initially, Britain could not compete with the delicate hand-woven fabrics coming from India.
Indian labor was 5 times cheaper, and their quality was unmatched. The British government even passed the Calico Acts to protect domestic wool and linen from Indian imports.
But instead of stopping the trade, these laws forced British entrepreneurs to innovate. The first domino fell in 1733, when John Kay invented the flying shuttle. This simple device doubled the output of a weaver, but it created an immediate crisis.
Until James Hargreaves stepped forward with the spinning jenny. This wooden-framed machine allowed a single worker to spin multiple threads at once.
Then came Richard Arkwright. He developed the water frame, a machine that was too large for a home and required the power of a rushing river. Arkwright built the world's first true cotton mill, proving that production was no longer a family affair. Within a few years, Samuel Crompton combined the best of both machines into the spinning mule.
The result was staggering. In 1750, Britain imported 2.5 million pounds of raw cotton.
By 1850, that number had skyrocketed to 588 million pounds. Manchester, once a modest town, earned the nickname Cottonopolis.
It was a city of 900 factories, where the sky was permanently bruised by coal smoke.
But as the cost of clothes fell, the human cost began to rise.
British machines were so productive, they eventually undersold Indian artisans.
Destroying an entire industry and leaving millions without work.
While the textile mills were spinning, another revolution was happening underground.
As coal mines grew deeper, they faced an enemy, the water. This necessity led to the birth of the steam engine.
At the turn of the 18th century, Thomas Newcomen introduced the first successful piston steam engine. They opened up a great expansion in mining, allowing workers to go deeper into the earth than ever before. The true turning point came when a Scotsman named James Watt realized that the Newcomen engine was a massive waste of steam. Watt perfected an engine that used a separate condenser, increasing efficiency so much that his engines used only a fraction of the coal.
For the first time in history, mankind was no longer dependent on the wind, the tide, or the muscle of an animal.
A factory could be built anywhere, not just next to a river.
Steam was applied to everything. It blew the bellows of blast furnaces, it hammered iron, and it drove the looms. Steam also transformed the iron industry.
Earlier breakthroughs by the Darby family had shown that coke, a purified form of coal, could fuel blast furnaces.
This allowed for much larger furnaces and an explosion in production. A famous early example is the Iron Bridge, a structure that signaled to the planet that a new material had arrived.
Puddling was back-breaking, dangerous work. Few lived to see their 40th year.
But their labor built the bridges, the factories, and eventually the railways that would knit the world together.
As the factories grew, the landscape of Britain changed forever. This was the era of massive urbanization.
In 1800, only 3% of the human population lived in cities. By the end of the century, that number was approaching 50%.
People flooded in from the countryside, pushed by the enclosure of common lands and pulled by the promise of steady wages.
Manchester was the template for this new world. Its population exploded from 10,000 to over 2.3 million. But this growth was chaotic and unplanned.
Friedrich Engels described the back streets of Manchester as a stony desert.
He saw rivers turned green by chemical waste and raw sewage. Clean water was a luxury, and diseases like cholera and typhoid were endemic.
In some districts, more than half of all children died before the age of 5. In the factory, work followed the clock. Shifts lasted 12 to 14 hours, 6 days a week.
Most of the workers in the early textile mills were unmarried women and children. Children as young as 8 were employed as scavengers, crawling under moving machinery.
This created a profound social crisis, leading to the first general laws against child labor, the Factory Acts,
which eventually limited the working day and began the slow process of moving children to the schoolroom.
Yet, despite the hardship, the Industrial Revolution also created a massive new middle class. There was a growing population of businessmen,
Clerks, foremen, and engineers.
These people lived in comfortable homes with carpets, mirrors, and the latest consumer goods.
As production increased, the old system of muddy roads and slow river barges could no longer cope.
The Industrial Revolution needed a way to move bulk materials quickly and cheaply. The answer was a massive expansion of infrastructure. First came the age of canals. Moving coal by water was far more efficient than land transport.
This success inspired canal mania, a building spree that linked major manufacturing centers.
But the canals were soon eclipsed by the most iconic invention of the era, the railway.
Railways were made possible by 3 things: cheap puddled iron for the rails, the rolling mill, and the high-pressure steam engine.
Innovators like George Stephenson realized that if you put a steam engine on wheels, you could move weight at speeds the world had never seen. The opening of the first intercity railway between Liverpool and Manchester was a sensation. Passengers could now travel between cities in hours instead of days.
On the oceans, steam was doing the same. The arrival of the steamship meant that global trade was no longer entirely dependent on the wind. The world was shrinking.
For decades, Britain tried to keep its industrial secrets to itself.
But the fire could not be contained. British entrepreneurs were eager to expand, and other nations were desperate to catch up.
Belgium was the second country to industrialize. Thanks to its rich coal deposits, the region transformed rapidly.
In France, the revolution was slower and more steady.
Germany, however, was a different story. The construction of railways acted as a catalyst, linking the major cities and creating a massive demand for steel.
By the time of German unification, the Ruhr Valley had become a powerhouse of heavy industry.
The Americans added their own innovation, the American system of manufacturing, the development of interchangeable parts.
Following the Meiji Restoration, Japan made a deliberate decision to catch up with the West.
Thousands of students were sent abroad to learn modern science and technology.
Not everyone welcomed the new age. For many craft workers, the Industrial Revolution was a disaster. This despair led to the Luddite movement, where workers began breaking into factories and smashing the machines that had stolen their livelihoods.
The government responded with force, protecting the new industry at all costs. But from this unrest, a new kind of organization was born: the trade union.
Workers realized that while one man was powerless, 1,000 men could halt production.
The romantics, poets, and artists recoiled at the dark, satanic mills.
They mourned the loss of nature. Even the environment was beginning to push back.
Scientists began to trace the link between polluted water and disease, leading to the construction of massive new sewage systems.
The Industrial Revolution didn't just build our cities, it fundamentally redefined what it means to be human, shifting us from a species that followed the slow rhythm of the seasons to one that demands the world move at the speed of a machine. We have inherited a world of boundless convenience and breathtaking speed.
But we also carry the weight of the environmental and social shadows that progress left behind.
I'm Tim, watching the past so we can understand the present. And together, we keep history reborn. I'll see you in the next era.